That which causes us trials shall yield us triumph, and that which makes our hearts ache shall fill us with gladness. For the only true happiness is to learn, to advance, and to improve. None of this could happen without rejecting error, ignorance, and imperfection. We must pass out of darkness and reach to the light. The Primarch Fulgrim, Attainment of Perfection. Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. As promised, I am back to making videos, and I thought I'd dive back in to the Horus Heresy series, which, if you know anything about the series, it's been going on for a while now. It was originally a 3-book trilogy that was just supposed to, and through the Black Library and in the Warhammer universe, kind of give a description of how Horus fell. And you know what? After describing how Horus fell, I think the authors realized that the fans of this lore and this universe called Warhammer wanted more. And boy, did they give us more. Because even though the Horus Heresy tells you how Horus fell, it doesn't really tell you why he fell. And that's what the rest of the books in this unending series that keeps going on and on and on and on, that's what the rest of the books tell you. And if you hear jangling, that's my dog. You know, he's always here. But that's what the rest of the books tell us. Why did this happen? Because it's more than just a leader falling. Let's think about events happening right now. So today is the 22nd of August. It's a Sunday afternoon, and I just got out of church, and I'm going to be talking about Fulgrim today, of all characters. Thinking about current events that are happening in the world. When a leader falls, when a nation falls, when mistakes are made, conquerings happen, there was a process behind that. And there are so many pieces and players that are at work and a part of this stage that none of us have the complete answers to why something happened. You really have to dig not only into the background and motivations of the leader that's in the high position and the spotlight and understand why they did a bad, but what about everyone around them? Why did they do a bad? And why did they think a particular course of action was okay? Or why did they turn from a path that seemed more right and go way, way to the other side and ultimately end up, sacrificing people that wanted nothing to do with their war? People who are innocent, people who are just, living their lives, or taking the ideals of a society that may be very grand on their own and reducing them to something very base and repugnant. It happens all the time. And what I love about this series, especially just, with the way the world is right now, it helps give a little insight into that machine called war, but not just war, into leaders, world leaders. Why do they make the decisions they make? Why were they corrupted? If they started out with such grand ideas, how did they end up in such a devastating place? And being okay with making decisions today that a month ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, they wouldn't have made. What happened? And books like this help us understand those things and make sense of them in the times we live in. Not only that, Fulgrim is one of my favorite characters, nutty as he is. He's one of my favorite characters in the Horus Heresy series, because even though he is, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but even though he is insane, absolutely, you can see his motivation and you know why he did what he did, and why he becomes what he eventually becomes. in a later book, The Angel Exterminatus. So we're going to talk about Fulgrim today. And of course, we're going to talk about the novel Fulgrim, but we're also going to get into the character of Fulgrim as well, because he's just so interesting. And I appreciate the honesty of who Fulgrim is, because even if you don't agree with him, it's not like he lied to you. He's very upfront with his awfulness. So yeah, let's not delay the point anymore. Let's talk about our friend Fulgrim. So I am jumping around a little bit in the Warhammer timeline now, because once you get out of that initial trilogy, you can kind of read the books in any order that you want to. Well, not any order, but for the most part, if you read Fulgrim today, but Angel Exterminatus next year, it's not that big a deal, because these are now centralized stories on what's happening with the Primarchs, the sons of the Emperor, and what's happening with their legions and all of the members of mankind that get involved in the war that Horus is starting now between Terra, Earth, and the Emperor, and all of those who would join Horus and the legions of Chaos. Now, when Horus begins his war, his campaign against the Emperor and Terra, he's not initially overt about his intentions. As we know, on the moon of Davin is where Horus was taken over by the chaos god Nurgle and gave his spirit up, and now he's basically, a chaos demon prince in the making, and is going to mess up all the things that the Emperor tried to establish for humanity in the known universe. Because the goal of the Emperor was to drive out all of the Xenos, all of the chaos, demons, things that would impede humanity from being successful in establishing worlds. All of that had to go. Even if the alien, the Xenos, was friendly to the humans, still not human, it's gotta go. And even humans that would not bend to the will of the Imperium of Man, they had to go too. So the Emperor crafted his gene sons, 20 sons from his gene seed, each having distinct characteristics of the Emperor of Mankind himself, who were genetic perfection to lead his armies of war. The Space Marine, the Astartes, and Horus is chief among them. For a long time, it was just the Emperor and Horus waging war with their Astartes legions across the galaxy. Eventually, the other sons are discovered, and one of those eventually discovered sons is Fulgrim. Now, Fulgrim's special. Fulgrim lives for the pursuit of perfection. And you'll notice that with all the legions, there is a standout characteristic that drives the motivation of any particular group of Space Marines. And it's usually based on the Primarch's leanings. So when that gene seed from the Primarch is put into that prospective Space Marine inductee and their body starts to change, it doesn't just change their body chemistry, it changes their brain chemistry. They start to think like the Primarch, feel like the Primarch. That's what creates those bonds of unity, of brotherhood between the Legiones Astartes, because they aren't just brothers in battle, they are brothers in creation. Literally, they share the same blood, which is of their Primarch. Fulgrim is one that wants perfection. Not just perfection, perfection and beauty. He fancies himself the most beautiful of all the Primarchs, even though the angel Sanguinius exists. That's a whole other Primarch, but that one's got angel wings coming out his back, and he probably is actually the most beautiful, but in Fulgrim's head, he's the most beautiful. He's tall, slender, got this super long white hair. He looks like, every anime girl's crush on the goth side. Like he's that. And with his legion, he expects perfection in battle. He expects perfection in strength and perfection through the arts. He's one of the few Primarchs who allows their legion to indulge in human arts like painting, song, music, sculpture, whatever it is. And something really unique happens in his legion. So the Emperor wants all of the feats of war remembered. And the way they're going to be remembered is through a group called remembrancers. The job of a remembrancer is a human who has a particular artistic gift that they've studied their whole lives. Much like the Astartes study war, these guys study some kind of art, whether it's taking pictures, whether it's painting, it could be composing, whatever it is. But in their art that they represent, they go along with the legions and take note of everything happening. They create great statues to the Astartes, beautiful paintings, write songs about them, all that kind of thing. And most of the legions really don't want them around. I mean, think about it. You're like a 12-foot tall hulking battle giant, and you've got these little 5-foot tall peons biting at your ankles, wanting to take pictures with you. I mean, it's like selfie culture taken to a whole nother level, really. But I couldn't imagine that. And they're not into it. But Fulgrim's Legion, the Emperor's children, they're into it. They are vain. All of them. Every single one of them. And they're vain in a different way, is what's funny about it. There is one of his legion, Lucius, who is an especially gifted swordsman. So gifted and so practiced that Lucius thinks he's so perfect at his art that he might even challenge his own Primarch. Okay. I mean, if you want to go after the boss, you do you, honey. And then there's another, and you probably can't tell this one's a bad guy from his name, Fabius Bile. Yeah, couldn't guess from the first time reading that name that he was going to end up being awful. But anyway, Fabius Bile seeks perfection through the body, through changing physiology to be a more perfect creature. But we find out as we go through Fulgrim and other books in the Horus Heresy series and books about Fabius Bile on his own that he's terrible and has done terrible things in the pursuit of perfection. And Fulgrim himself, he lets all of his little legionnaires pursue whatever floats their boat. If whatever makes you feel good, you go do that thing and you be as good at it as you can be. Now, the remembrancers in this legion, they have unfettered access, basically, to these Astartes, to the Emperor's children. And the great majority of them are on Fulgrim's flagship, the Pride of the Emperor. These titles are very important. Think about that. Fulgrim fancies himself perfect, which that probably means in his head somewhere seeds of jealousy towards Horus already exist because he thinks he's perfect. Why isn't he the War Master? Just saying. I mean, the seed starts somewhere. He fancies himself a better tactician than the rest of his brothers, and he certainly thinks he's better looking than the rest of them, even though they're supposed to be above such things as Primarchs. But human's gonna human. Even if you change a human's complete physiology and make them a demigod, humans are gonna human. And that very human part of them is what allows chaos to creep in. Now let's pause here and talk about the Chaos Gods. Now, in the world of Warhammer 40k, Warhammer and Warhammer 40k, because Warhammer is pre-Horus Heresy, 40k is post-Horus Heresy. That's basically the delineation between the two game sets. It doesn't matter if it's 40,000 or 40k. The concept of God is very different. In the Warhammer 40,000 universe, so before the Horus Heresy wraps up, the idea of an all-knowing, all-powerful being in the universe was basically not allowed. Even though the Emperor in this world technically represents God, because he's all-powerful, all-knowing, he's like 1,000,000 years old, he's basically God in this world. He doesn't allow anyone to worship him as God, which I'm not upset about, honestly. Good on you, recognizing you're not God. But he elevates science above everything else. Well, here's the thing about human beings. And I'm Southern Baptist, okay? So we're just dealing in the world of fantasy here, but fantasy has a root in truth. That's what makes us gravitate toward it. If there's not a basis in truth in our fantasies, then they don't become these great stories that we attach ourselves to. There's that thing called suspension of disbelief. That's a whole other video. But anywho, in this world, since there are no gods, that part of humanity that yearns to serve and worship is not fed. It's there, but it's not fed. And it expresses itself in other ways. Like with the Astartes, it expresses itself in wanting to do their best for their Primarch and their Emperor, to have the most kills, to be the most skilled, to know the most about being a great tactician. That's how it shows up. In the humans, it shows up in their willingness to bend to the authority of the Imperium of Man. It's still there, that need to worship and serve, but it's not there in the traditional sense that those of us who live in the real world are used to, where it shows up as religion. Because religion's basically not allowed. If they encounter a human planet that has religion, they crush the religion, period, because there can be no religion. It's only science. You're here for right now, you're going to live for however long, you're going to serve the Imperium, and then you're going to die. That's all there is. And Fulgrim does have that need of service and worship, but the way it's coming out through him is in wanting to be that perfectionist. His body basically has become a temple, a house of worship and perfection, if you will, and he's trying to make himself that which is forbidden in this world. And that's where the seed starts. Because way over on the other side of the galaxy, one of his Primarch brothers has already gone full worship of the Emperor, just hasn't told anybody yet. We'll talk about him in another book. But because that need is there, some Astartes and Primarchs went way one direction into just becoming the best battle brothers they could, but a handful of them went ahead and found things to worship. Now, while some of those Primarchs went and worshiped the Emperor anyway, even though they were forbidden to, others, Horus, ended up becoming servants of chaos, which is kind of the foil, the opposite of the known universe. Chaos is where anything that would disrupt the progress of humanity lives. But chaos doesn't see itself as evil. Chaos sees humanity as the disease. That if humans were to progress as much as the Emperor plans, humans would eventually destroy the galaxy. And honestly, looking at the world the way it is right now, can't say I disagree. I cannot say I disagree at all. But chaos's goal is to exist as they are without humanity interrupting them. And there are 4 chaos gods. There is Nurgle, the god of death and decay, my least favorite. There is Slaanesh, the god of beauty and seduction and all kinds of hedonism. Ew. Then there's Tzeentch, the god of change. And then there is Khorne, the god of war. Now, which one of those do you think would appeal to Fulgrim? I give you one guess. So, Fulgrim and his legion end up fighting a battle in the lair system. And during this battle, long story short, because who can talk is this girl. I can talk all day. And Homegirl's not going to put out another 50-minute video anytime soon. Maybe. I don't know. But in the lair system, and Fulgrim is the receiver of an artifact from this war. And it's an alien, a Xenos sword. And he's like, oh, good sword. I'm going to keep it. Well, that was planted because there are members of his own legion who are working with members of another legion to corrupt Fulgrim. And these shadows in the background who can see the seeds of corruption in their leaders, they hone in on it and then they exploit it. He doesn't know that Fabius Bile, in conjunction with other legions, is looking for a way in because Fabius has already given himself over to chaos. But he needs his leader to give himself over to chaos, so then he has free reign to do all the things that he wants to do. And this particular sword artifact that Fulgrim receives, it is actually imbued with the spirit of Slaanesh. And he wears it and he uses it. But just like that artifact that wounded the Primarch and put the seeds of chaos in him, basically, over time, that's what this artifact does to Fulgrim. Chaos seeps in. And now here's what I've discovered. Apparently, chaos can't get in where you don't give them a door. Think about that. I mean, that's kind of profound. If it wasn't already somewhere in them to be corrupted, then they would be incorruptible. Oh, you didn't know we were going to get deep today talking about Fulgrim, but we did. So the corruptible piece of him is basically like, just a little tear in a garment, and then somebody sticks their hands in and goes, and rips it apart so that all the chaos can be poured in. That's what happens over time. And slowly, Fulgrim begins to allow perversions in his legion and in the remembrancers to explode inside his ships, especially aboard his flagship, the Pride of the Emperor. We're talking about things like, I just came from church. I chose to review this. We're talking about remembrancers who get so sucked in to chaos, to Slaanesh, and the pursuit of perfection, that to create the perfect piece of art, one of these remembrancers uses their own blood and creates just a demonic painting of Fulgrim that everybody sees as beautiful. And that's the crux of what happens to the Emperor's children in Fulgrim. The pursuit of perfection, whole other discussion, but what they're seeking as being the perfect legion for the Emperor becomes completely perverted. They take it to those extremes of what humans will do, and then they go 10 steps beyond. Some of the stuff that's in this one and any book that involves Fulgrim, not gonna lie, had to put it down a couple of times. I was like, oh, I didn't know y'all wrote like this. I mean, it's nothing worse than you would see in like a zombie movie or something, but to see it written out, there's just something about hearing someone describe some of this stuff that's just extra visceral. And the writers of this series, and this one is by Graham McNeil. He's one of my favorites in the Black Library. He's got words, man. And the words he uses to describe some of the things happening, you're like, oh. So that's what it was. Well, one of the remembrancers amongst the group that's following the Emperor's children around, he's not down with all of this. He's incorruptible. Okay. But he's incorruptible, and he is watching his fellow remembrancers fall under this spell. But where did it come from? What had happened? And there's actually a couple of Astartes who also are seemingly incorruptible, at least not to chaos anyway. And they're like, what is going on with our Primarch and our Legion? They see the outward changes. They see that the artwork that was once gleaming and beautiful is starting to rot and twist and be vulgar. They hear the words of their Primarch that were once always edifying their gene father, the Emperor of Mankind, and how now there's just these sickeningly sweet words that are woven in there that are pulling them away from their original mission just bit by bit. It's almost like the words are spells and they're working their ways into the minds and hearts of the Astartes and the Remembrancers. And the thing is, the Remembrancers are on the bottom rung of authority on these ships. They have no authority. They're just there to write, draw, and take pictures. That's what they're there to do. And when they start becoming corrupted, most of them don't even realize it's happening to them. They're victims of the system. The system is becoming corrupt, and just naturally that trickle down evil, they become corrupted, and their artwork becomes corrupted. Who they are as humans. Some of them end up barely being human at the end of this. And Fulgrim's allowing it. Because when Slaanesh is called the chaos god of pleasure and perfection, it's not perfection like we think it. Like, I've got a perfectly stacked set of books here. That's not the perfection we're talking about. Slanesh is perfection through pain and perversion. That the more extreme the act is done upon the body, the more pure whatever expression comes out. That's the perfection we're talking about. And that is dangerous territory. We see that play out in our people in the world as well. The pursuit of pleasure through corrupting others, corrupting the self. And I know that's dangerous territory. Don't at me in the comments. We're talking about this right now. Okay, it's just where it is. Good art reflects life. And it makes you wonder, is it worth it? Because of what ultimately happens to this legion. Let's hop back over to Fabius Bile for a second. What a name. Mr. Bile is an apothecary for the Emperor's children. A doctor, basically. A field doctor, field surgeon. That should tell you right there the things that he gets up to. Before Fulgrim ever becomes corrupted or exposed to chaos, he was in his laboratory, his offices, literally taking people apart and putting them back together in crazy ways and trying to create perfected beings. And they are all just grotesque monsters that I'm not going to describe here. And he is all into it. In fact, I've seen a lot of commentators write that Fabius Bile is probably the most just repulsive character in all of the Warhammer universe because of the things he does to others. And even what he does to himself. He can't be in all places at once, so Fabius actually makes copies of himself so that he can perform many experiments and do many terrible things in many places eventually. Like, he's awful. But he was one of the architects to bring down Fulgrim because he had a desire to do things that were outside of the will of the Emperor, outside of the will of God. He had to get his leadership to a place where he could expand on that and do more. And he played a big hand in getting Fulgrim corrupted. And Fulgrim literally just fell right into it. He fell into it, and once he got there, he enjoyed it, reveled in it. There is a remembrancer who is gifted in music, the most gifted musician basically in the galaxy, and I cannot pronounce her name, and I'm not going to try right now. But she was initially there to put on concerts for the higher up Astartes, and they would just praise and appreciate her, and oh, she's so great, like, any beautiful concert you go to. Well, that changes, and her final concert that she gives, she is literally possessed by chaos and plays something that probably wasn't really music if we could have heard it. And it unleashes a blood frenzy in the concert hall. And the Astartes in there all kill each other as a result of her concert. Like, that's how crazy it gets. And our one remembrancer who is trying to save his fellow humans, he fails. Then our other Astartes who are not corrupted as well, some of them escape, some of them are victims of Fabius Bile and the rest of the Legion. But the central character here is Fulgrim. He's the leader, much like Horus. He's the leader. There's always stuff going on in the background that leads to the downfall, that leads to the big event that interrupts life as we know it. But a lot of those things could not have happened if those in power have remained incorruptible. But what's the quote? Power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. What the Chaos Gods offer to the Primarchs is freedom from the restrictions that the Emperor of Mankind puts on them. You have a yearning to serve and worship, but you also want power. If you will serve and worship the denizens of chaos, we will give you our power. And you know what? You can do what you want with our power. We're not going to put any restrictions on you. Just don't help the Emperor anymore. and half of the legions fall for it. Fulgrim falls for it hard. Fulgrim falls for it so hard that there's an entire novel, Angel Exterminatus, I've mentioned it a couple of times, dedicated to his journey to literally becoming a chaos demon, called the Angel Exterminatus. He completely changes who he is because of this. And he allows the most vile things to happen in his legion and anywhere his legion touches. And that's what happens. When leaders become corrupt and their vision is corrupted, they allow the most terrible things to happen. And often those at the bottom are victims of the system. The Emperor let his legion fall to chaos. Anyone who was connected to that legion, even if they themselves didn't give themselves to chaos, didn't give themselves to Slaanesh, they were going to be a victim of someone who gave themselves over to chaos. This one's a hard read. Now, look, I love a good sci-fi novel. I love military science fiction, all into Warhammer. Happy for the audio novels now, because with my busy life, this is how I get a lot of reading done, is through the audios. I love having physical media. You know, if I'm out camping or something, I love a book. But I will say this, you know, these are hard books, some of them. And when I say hard, I mean you probably don't want to let your 7-year-old read this. I mean, I think I read this one. When did I first read Fulgrim? I had to be about 25 or 26. And I kind of stopped reading Warhammer books for a minute after reading this one, because I was like, what did I just read? It was like Dora in written form. But it's still art, and it's still true to life. So I do recommend it, but if you're real sensitive, I do not recommend it, because there's some things in here that you're probably not going to want to read. But just like real life, there are things out there happening that most of us just don't want to know about. That doesn't mean they didn't happen. I'm getting way too deep for a Warhammer review. So as always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Yes, the contest is still going. I don't know when I'll get to 500 subscribers, but when that happens across my 3 platforms, the Twitter, the IG, and the YouTube, nerdy prizes from each one of those platforms will follow for US address. I'll keep plugging away until I get there. So I appreciate your view. Please share this around, and let me know which Warhammer book I should review next down in the comments.